I still remember the sharp sting of the cold Ohio wind the moment I stepped out of that hospital. It was early November, just days before Thanksgiving, and snow had started to fall gently, covering the world in a quiet white blanket. The air was crisp, biting through my thin coat as I made my way to the taxi that would take me home. Home. Such a simple word, yet so heavy with hope and fear. I had just come through surgery. The doctors told me I was lucky, that my body had fought hard, but I was weak. My legs trembled, and every breath reminded me of the pain I was still healing from. Yet despite all that, my heart was full of hope, hope to be with my family again, to sit at that big dining table, surrounded by the warmth and laughter I had missed so much. For years, Thanksgiving had been my favorite day. The smell of roasted turkey, cinnamon, and pumpkin pie would fill the house. My grandchildren would run around, their laughter ringing through the rooms. We would share stories, jokes, and memories, everything I dreamed of having again. When the taxi pulled up to my son's house, I felt a flutter of excitement. The porch light glowed softly through the falling snow. I gripped the handle of my bag tightly and took a deep breath. This was it. I was finally going home. My son was the first to greet me, wrapping me in a quick, almost hesitant hug. "You're home," he said quietly, his voice tired but relieved. I smiled, my heart aching with the need for connection. "Happy Thanksgiving," I whispered. But then I saw her, Amy, my daughter-in-law, standing by the kitchen doorway. She looked at me with cold eyes, her arms crossed like a gate shutting me out before I even stepped inside. "You've been in the hospital," she said, her tone clipped and sharp. "It's probably better if you eat out in the garage, just to be safe." I blinked, the words hitting me like a punch to the chest. "Excuse me," I managed, struggling to keep my voice steady. Amy's lips pressed into a thin line. "You know, germs. We don't want anyone getting sick." She tried for a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Eat in the garage? On Thanksgiving? Because I smelled like hospital?" I looked to my son, to my grandchildren, to anyone who might have a flicker of compassion. But they all averted their eyes, busying themselves with the preparations inside, pretending I wasn't there. I felt like a stranger in my own family. I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded, fighting back tears that threatened to spill. "If that's what you think is best," I said softly. The garage door creaked open, and I stepped inside. The dim light flickered overhead, revealing a folding table and a plastic chair that looked cold and unwelcoming. The snow drifted in through the cracks, and the air was bitter, sharp against my skin despite my coat. On the table, a plate sat under a foil cover. I hesitated for a moment, then lifted the foil. The food was there, but it was nothing like the feast inside. No laughter, no hugs, no warmth, only silence and the cold. I sat down, my hands trembling not from the cold, but from the crushing weight of humiliation and loneliness. Through the thin walls, I could hear the sounds of the family dinner, the clinking of glasses, the hum of conversation, the laughter of children playing. But none of it was for me. I took a bite, but the food tasted bitter, like ashes. Every chew reminded me I was invisible, unwanted. I thought of the hospital, the smells, the sterile white walls, and how they had reduced me to something to avoid. Tears pricked behind my eyes. I blinked them away, not wanting to be seen weak. Why was this happening to me? After all I had done for this family, raising my son, supporting his dreams, being there for every milestone, how could they cast me aside like trash? I wrapped my coat tighter around myself, shivering in the cold garage as snow swirled outside. The loneliness pressed in, heavier than the winter night. That night, as I sat there alone, the walls between me and my family felt insurmountable. I realized I was no longer just hurt, I was betrayed. But somewhere deep inside, a fire began to burn. If I was not good enough to sit at their table, to share their laughter, to be part of their lives, then maybe, just maybe, they weren't good enough to inherit the life I had built. The days that followed Thanksgiving felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The garage, once just a cold, lonely space, became my prison. The thin walls barely kept out the biting wind, and every creak and howl of the night seemed to echo my aching heart. I was home, but I wasn't really there. Each morning, I woke hoping it was all a mistake, that someone would come out, open the door, and tell me this was just a cruel joke. But no one did. Amy didn't bring me hot coffee or check if I needed a blanket. My son barely glanced my way. Even the children, who once ran to hug me, now kept their distance, whispering behind closed doors. I tried to reach out. I called softly through the door once, then twice. "Is anyone there?" My voice cracked. Silence answered back. I spent hours staring out at the gray sky, watching snowflakes drift lazily to the ground, each one a small, cold reminder of how far I'd fallen. The loneliness was unbearable. In those moments, memories came rushing back, of better times, of laughter and warmth. I saw their faces as children, running into my arms. The birthdays I had organized, the nights I stayed up when they were sick. How had it all come to this? I thought about the surgery, about how vulnerable I had been lying in that hospital bed, hoping they'd come visit, hoping they'd care. But instead, I was cast aside, as if the hospital smell was contagious, as if my pain was their shame. One night, the wind howled so fiercely I feared the cold would seep into my bones. I wrapped myself tighter in my coat, clutching a worn blanket I had brought from inside. I whispered to myself, "I'm still here. I'm still me." But the ache in my chest was growing, not just from the cold, but from the unbearable sting of rejection. I remembered the day Amy told me to eat in the garage. The words replayed in my mind, sharp and cruel. "You've been in the hospital. Better safe than sorry." Was I really so disgusting? So unwanted? The thought made my eyes burn with tears I no longer tried to hold back. My son, my own flesh and blood, never spoke up for me. Never asked if I was okay. His silence screamed louder than any words. I wondered if they ever thought about me at all. Days turned into a blur of isolation. I wasn't just alone. I was invisible, like a ghost haunting a house that no longer wanted me. But deep down, anger began to rise. A slow-burning fire fueled by humiliation and betrayal. They had taken everything from me, my dignity, my place in their lives. I would not let them take my voice. As the cold seeped in, I made a promise to myself. I would fight back, not with anger, but with truth, with strength they never saw coming. If I was not good enough to eat at their table, then I would make sure they understood what they had lost. Because sometimes, the deepest wounds give birth to the fiercest strength. The nights in that cold garage were long, but my resolve grew stronger with every passing hour. Each moment spent alone, wrapped in threadbare blankets, surrounded by the echo of their laughter through the walls, hardened a part of me I never knew existed. It was a quiet, burning flame of dignity, a flame they had tried to snuff out, but which only grew brighter in defiance. One evening, as the frost clung stubbornly to the window panes, I sat at the small folding table and pulled out my notebook. The pages were worn, but my hand was steady. I began to write. Words poured out of me, words I'd kept locked away beneath years of pain, sacrifice, and quiet endurance. I wrote about the dinners I had prepared, the birthdays I had celebrated, the nights I stayed awake worrying over them. I wrote about the hospital stays when I was too sick to stand, yet still hoping for a call, a visit, any sign that I mattered. Most of all, I wrote about how their rejection, how being sent away to eat alone in a cold garage on the most sacred family night, had shattered something inside me. But this letter wasn't just for them. It was for me, for the woman who needed to reclaim her voice, her power, her worth. I wrote, "If I am not good enough to eat at your table, then perhaps you are not good enough to inherit the life I have built, the love I have given, the sacrifices I have made." The ink dried on the page, heavy with pain and finality. That week, I found a lawyer willing to help me amend my will. The papers were clear and unyielding, just like the feelings I'd carried for so long. I left out the names of those who had pushed me away, the ones who thought I was a burden, an inconvenience, a reminder of sickness. It was the hardest decision I had ever made, but the one that set my soul free. When the family found out, the house was anything but peaceful. The news hit like a thunderclap, shaking the fragile bonds that had been holding them together. Voices rose in shock and anger. Accusations flew. How could she do this? She's being cruel. This is blackmail. But they didn't ask why. They didn't ask what they had done to deserve it. I sat quietly through the storm, my heart pounding but my spirit unbroken. I had spoken my truth, and it was a truth they could no longer ignore. Amy's face twisted in fury when she confronted me. You're punishing us for what? Being cautious? Protecting the family. I met her gaze steadily. Protecting the family means more than hiding behind walls. It means love, respect, inclusion. Things you denied me. My son's silence was louder than any words. He looked away, ashamed perhaps, or simply unwilling to face the consequences. But I no longer needed their approval. I no longer needed to beg for a seat at their table. The letter and the will were my final stand, proof that dignity, once lost, could still be reclaimed. I thought back to all the years of giving, of being there when no one else was. And I realized something crucial. Love should never be conditional. As the snow melted outside and winter slowly gave way to spring, so too did I begin to thaw the frozen parts of my heart, not for them, but for myself. When the letter and the changes to the will became known, the quiet undercurrent of resentment that had simmered beneath the surface finally erupted. The family home, once a place of shared memories and laughter, turned into a battlefield of words and broken trust. I remember the day they confronted me, the tension thick enough to suffocate. Amy stormed in, her eyes blazing with fury, her voice sharp and unrelenting. How dare you punish us like this? After everything, you choose to tear the family apart. I looked her straight in the eyes, feeling the weight of years behind my words. This isn't punishment. It's justice. I only gave you what you showed me. Indifference, rejection, and cruelty. My son stood silently to the side, his face tight with emotion, neither defending me nor joining the attack. It broke my heart to see his hesitation, caught between loyalty to his wife and the mother who raised him. The others argued, voices rising and falling in waves of blame and denial. Some called me cold, some called me selfish. But I had spent years sacrificing for this family, quietly putting their needs before my own. Now, I was finally putting myself first. What about the hospital? One of them asked bitterly. You made us worry. You forced us to send you to the garage. I shook my head slowly. The hospital was where I fought to live. The garage was where you decided I didn't belong. That choice was yours. Tears welled up, not from weakness, but from the release of a pain I had held so tightly inside. I told them about every lonely night in that cold garage, the silence that swallowed me whole, the sound of their laughter without me. Some of them looked away. Others refused to meet my gaze. But none apologized. The confrontation didn't heal us. It fractured us further. Days turned to weeks, and the family gatherings grew fewer, colder. Invitations stopped coming altogether. I was left to sit with my thoughts, nursing wounds far deeper than any surgery could cause. But even as the hurt threatened to consume me, I found strength in solitude. I began to understand that family isn't just about blood or shared history. It's about respect, love, and kindness. And if those things aren't given freely, then no amount of shared DNA can hold a family together. Outside my window, the seasons changed. The biting cold of winter gave way to the soft promise of spring. And with it, something stirred within me, a quiet hope that maybe someday I would find peace, whether with them or without. I realized that sometimes standing firm in your truth means facing loss, but it also means reclaiming your worth. And so, despite the fractures and the pain, I stood tall, knowing that I had finally taken control of my own story. Spring had arrived, and with it came a slow thaw, not just in the weather, but in my heart. The fractures within my family remained, the silence lingering like a shadow, but I had finally found a new path forward, one that was mine alone to walk. The dinners were quieter now, the house less crowded, but the stillness brought me something I hadn't known I needed: peace. Without the weight of expectations and the sting of rejection, I began to breathe again. I spent my days rediscovering myself, walking beneath budding trees, reconnecting with old friends, and even signing up for art classes I had once dreamed of but never dared to pursue. Each small step was a reclaiming of my spirit, a declaration that I was more than the sum of their cold words. I realized that my worth did not depend on their acceptance or my place at their table. It lived in the love I held for myself, the kindness I finally allowed myself to feel. Of course, there were moments of longing. I missed my grandchildren's laughter, the memories of better times flashing through my mind like old photographs. But those memories no longer chained me to pain. Instead, they reminded me of the strength it took to stand up and walk away from what no longer served me. I found forgiveness, not for them, but for my own heart. Forgiveness that set me free from bitterness and opened the door to healing. Life isn't always perfect. Families aren't always whole. But sometimes, letting go of the things that hurt us is the first step toward finding true happiness. Though I no longer sat at their table, I was proud of the woman I had become. The woman who rose from the cold garage, who turned hurt into power, and found light in the darkest of nights. To anyone feeling abandoned, rejected, or lost, you are not alone. You deserve love, starting with the love you give yourself. Because in the end, the most precious legacy isn't what you leave behind for others, but how you live and how you love every single day.